Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt. These are probably the three most famous battles of the Hundred Years' War, and they all seem to tell the same story. A large French army meets a smaller English one. The French attack. The English longbowmen shoot them to pieces. By the end, the field is covered with dead French nobles. At Poitiers, the French king is taken prisoner. At Agincourt, much of the military elite of France is killed or captured. It is easy to come away with the impression that French knights spent 70 years riding into arrows and learning absolutely nothing. Except these were experienced soldiers. The men-at-arms had trained for war since childhood. They had some of the best weapons and armor money could buy, and they often had far more men. We also know that a longbow could not reliably punch through every good steel breastplate. A knight in full armor was not helpless. So why did so many of them die in front of much smaller English armies? Because getting through the arrows was only one part of the problem. The French first had to cross bad ground, squeeze into a narrow front, get past ditches, hedges, pits, or stakes, and then fight English men-at-arms who had been waiting for them. The archers made every part of that journey worse, especially from the flanks. Take the bow away from the system, and the English position becomes much weaker. Take away the ground and the obstacles, and the archers themselves become dangerously exposed. The famous victories came from all of these things working together. To see how the French kept ending up in this situation, we have to leave the battlefield for a moment and look at the campaign that led to it. England did not have the men or the money to occupy all of France. It could hold ports, fortresses, and whole regions, especially in the southwest. But it could not conquer an enormous kingdom one town at a time. Instead, English armies often carried out destructive mounted raids known as chevauchées. They moved through French territory, burning villages, looting towns, destroying supplies, driving away livestock, and taking whatever they could carry home. A raid could succeed without a major battle. The English got their loot, damaged the local economy, and made the French crown look powerless. The king demanded taxes and military service because he was supposed to protect the country. Every burning village told his subjects that he could not. For the English, going home with the loot was a successful campaign. For the French king, letting them go home could be a political disaster. That meant the French had to find the raiders, catch them, block their route, and make them fight. The pressure grew with every day of the pursuit. The English camp might be only a few miles ahead. Yet when the French reached it the next morning, they could find nothing except cold fires, wagon tracks, and more smoke on the horizon. So although the English had invaded France, once the armies met, they often stood on the defensive. The French were protecting their own land, yet they had to do the chasing and usually had to start the battle. An English army could be retreating, short of food, and apparently trapped, and still gain one huge advantage. It could stop at a place where a small force had a chance against a large one. That place was rarely a broad open field. A much better choice was somewhere cramped. There might be a wood on one side and a marsh, river, village, or thick hedge on the other. A slope, ditch, or patch of wet, freshly plowed ground could lie in front of the line. If there was time, the defenders could improve what nature had given them. The exact layout differed from one battle to the next. At Crécy, the slope mattered, along with pits mentioned in the sources. At Poitiers, the English made use of hedges, narrow openings, ditches, and marshy ground. At Agincourt, the French advanced through deep mud between two woods, toward archers protected by sharpened stakes. Different ground, same basic advantage. The larger army had no room to use its size. 10,000 men do not fight as 10,000 men if only a fraction of them can reach the enemy. The troops at the front do the fighting, everyone else waits behind them. Then, as the space fills up, the men in the rear begin to hinder the men they are supposed to support. For heavy cavalry, even a small obstacle could ruin the attack. A knight on horseback was dangerous, of course. Hundreds of knights arriving together at speed were devastating. The charge depended on keeping that speed and reaching the target as one body. Now put a ditch, a hedge, a row of pits, or sharpened stakes in their path. The first horses slow down, turn, or stop. The riders behind cannot see what has happened and keep coming. Gaps open. Horses collide. Some riders look for another way through. Within moments, one charge is broken into scattered groups. The English line no longer faces a solid wall of cavalry. It meets a few riders at a time, arriving tired, disordered, and almost stationary. They remain dangerous fighters, but the great shock of the charge is gone. This was the moment when the longbow did its best work. The bow was not a medieval machine gun, and armor did not suddenly become useless. Good plate could stop many arrows, especially at long range, but a French army offered plenty of other targets. Horses were much harder to protect. Visors, joints, arms, and legs remained vulnerable. An arrow did not even need to wound anyone to disrupt the advance. Under heavy fire, men lowered their heads, covered their faces, shortened their stride, and moved away from the arrows. The direction of the shooting mattered too. English men-at-arms usually held the center, while groups of archers stood on the wings, sometimes a little farther forward. The French therefore took fire from the sides as they approached. Men naturally edged away from it, toward the center of their own formation. But the center was already filling up. Those in front were slowing in mud or at the obstacles. Those behind were still advancing. The gaps between men vanished. Every fallen horse narrowed the route. Every man on the ground became something the next rank had to avoid. Agincourt shows what happened. When this went as far as it could go, the main French force advanced on foot across a wet, recently plowed field between two woods. As the field narrowed, the formation grew denser. The front ranks slowed while the men behind kept pushing. By the time some of the French reached the English line, they were packed so tightly that they had little room to swing a weapon. A man who fell in the mud could hardly stand again, with thousands of feet around him. Some were crushed or suffocated in the crowd. When the advance finally stopped, the more lightly equipped archers put down their bows, came in from the sides and fought with axes, mallets, swords, and daggers. The armor had not failed. The French had reached the English line, and many were still capable of fighting. What they no longer had was room. Bad ground had slowed them. The narrow field had compressed them. Their own rear ranks kept adding pressure after the men in front had stopped. The arrows made all of this happen faster and made it much harder to recover. Which brings us to the awkward part. If the ground was obviously bad, why attack there? French commanders were not blind to the danger, nor did every French plan amount to sending the entire army straight at the archers. At Poitiers and Agincourt, most of the men-at-arms were meant to fight on foot, while selected cavalry attacked the English archers on the wings. There was sense in that. If the cavalry drove off the archers, the infantry could approach the English center without being shot from both sides. The trouble came when several different parts of the army had to move at the right moment and support one another. A medieval king did not keep a set of ready-made divisions waiting in barracks. He summoned an army. Great lords arrived with their own followers, their own commanders, and their own banners. Each had his own status to protect and his own view of where he belonged in the battle line. Around them were mercenaries, town militias, crossbowmen, and foreign allies. On a map, all of this could be drawn as one large French army. On the ground, it was a temporary gathering of separate contingents. Keeping that gathering together was expensive. The men needed food. The horses consumed vast amounts of fodder. Mercenaries expected pay. Feudal service did not last forever, and a powerful lord might decide that he had waited long enough, or that his men were needed at home. Delay came at a cost. The longer the army stayed in the field, the harder it became to feed, pay, and control. The French could block the English road and still feel that they were running out of time. They needed a battle before the army began to thin out. The English could also force the issue. At Agincourt, the two sides waited at first. Then Henry moved his line closer. The archers pulled up their stakes, carried them forward, planted them again, and opened fire. The French now had three choices: attack, withdraw, or remain where they were and take arrows. None was attractive. Even a sensible French plan became fragile once the first troops moved. A commander could arrange an advance guard, a main body, and a reserve. He could give separate tasks to cavalry, infantry, and crossbowmen. Before the fighting started, everyone could be told what to do. Then the field filled with dust, shouting, frightened horses, arrows, and dozens of banners. Very quickly, no one could see the whole battle. Orders went by messenger, trumpet call, shouted command, or the movement of a flag. A messenger had to find the right lord in the middle of thousands of men. By the time he arrived, that lord might already be fighting. He might not hear the order. He might see something that made the order look hopelessly out of date. Crécy began with exactly this sort of confusion. The French arrived in a long marching column. The leading troops could see the English position, while thousands farther back were still on the road. To bring their full strength into battle, they needed to stop, let the rear catch up, rest, and organize the attack. The king ordered a halt, but an order could not instantly stop miles of men, horses, and wagons. The front slowed, troops behind pressed into them. Other contingents were still arriving. Some commanders saw the English in front of them and decided to attack. The French army went into battle in pieces, each group following the same route toward a position that had already defeated the group before it. At Poitiers, the confusion came later. French formations entered the battle one after another. When one of them withdrew and the royal princes moved toward the rear, the troops behind were not given a clear picture of what was happening. They saw royal banners going back and retreating men coming toward them. The sources disagree about the exact order of these events and why some units left. For a soldier standing in the rear, those details hardly mattered. If the men ahead were coming back and the princes were leaving, it could easily look as though the whole army had already lost. Medieval commanders could choose the ground, arrange the army, and give the first orders. Once thousands of men collided, their control became much weaker. They could send another messenger or commit the reserve, but they could not calmly move units around the field as if they were pieces on a board. A plan with several moving parts had several chances to come apart. This is the thread connecting Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. The English enter France and then withdraw. The French have to catch them. The English stop where the ground favors a smaller defending force. French numbers are squeezed into a narrow front, so only part of the army can fight. The first attack loses speed at a slope, hedge, ditch, muddy field, pits, or stakes. Arrows hit horses and come in from the flanks. Men going backward collide with men still trying to advance. Commanders lose track of what their own army is doing. The next contingent enters ground already churned up and blocked by the last one. No single act of madness is required. A few ordinary problems are enough. Each makes the next one worse until the whole attack collapses. The French still have their numbers, armor, and courage. They simply cannot bring those advantages to bear where the fight is actually taking place. There is a good way to check whether this explanation holds up. Put the English archers in a battle without enough time to prepare the ground. If the bow itself was the decisive weapon, they should still dominate. If the prepared position was essential, they should be in serious trouble. In 1429 at Patay, they were in serious trouble. The French caught the English while they were still moving, and before the archers had properly prepared their position. There was no narrow killing ground, no complete line of obstacles, and no time to settle the whole army into place. French heavy cavalry attacked quickly. The archers were caught as relatively lightly protected foot soldiers in the path of charging horsemen. The English army was shattered. Patay does not make the longbow useless. It shows how much the bow depended on everything around it. At Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, the weapon, the ground, the obstacles, and the English men-at-arms had supported one another. At Patay, that system never had time to form. France still had a larger problem to solve. One victory would not end the war. The crown needed an army that could stay in the field, carry out a long campaign, and obey a common command without relying on dozens of lords to cooperate for one decisive day. Under Charles VII, France gained more reliable taxation and a permanent corps of royal troops. These soldiers were paid by the king and stayed in service beyond a short feudal campaign. The crown could keep armies supplied for months, move them around the country, and use them in one operation after another. French artillery also became a serious force. An English army could still take up a narrow position and wait behind its archers. Now, however, French guns could bombard it. Staying put was dangerous. Leaving the defenses meant giving up the conditions that made the English system work. At Castillon in 1453, the situation was turned around completely. The French waited inside a fortified camp protected by artillery. The English hurried forward and attacked it. Their commander realized too late how strong the defenses were, and he could not stop the assault once it was underway. The English army was destroyed. French knights had never been helpless before the longbow. Their worst defeats came when an entire army was forced onto ground that robbed it of speed, space, order, and control. France won the war when it stopped accepting that kind of fight and built an army capable of waging a long campaign on its own terms.